It's been a while since my last Legends of Runeterra video, but there's a reason for that, and I think it's a pretty good one, and I'm going to cover the reason real briefly. It might take a minute, 2 minutes tops, and then we're going to get into the meat of the video, which is me going over what I think are some very strong decks. Now, the reason that I didn't put out a lot of content this previous week was because I wanted to be able to properly put my rubber stamp on my content going forward. That might sound a little weird, but here's my thought, my reasoning. When I was making videos for the Elder Scrolls Legends, I basically made videos that were one of two different styles or types. I had deck testing videos, and those videos were about trying new ideas. They were about the journey, not necessarily the finished product. You know, if I played 2 games and I lost 2 games, it wasn't a big deal because we were just testing out a new concept, a new idea. But whenever I made a deck guide, or like a legendary deck spotlight for the Elder Scrolls Legends, those were decks that I always felt confident that you could play all the way up to Legend rank in the Elder Scrolls Legends. And I knew that because I could do that myself. I could take that deck and play it to Legend. I had done it over and over and over again. Legends of Runeterra, I hadn't made Master yet, but I was putting out deck guides saying, hey, these are lists that I think are good, and I stand by that. I think that the lists that I've shared to date are definitely solid, or at least they were in those metas. I know we've had a balance patch since then, but just because I felt it didn't mean that you had any reason to believe me. And so I needed to essentially get some credentials, and I've done that now. Spent this week playing in my free time off and on stream as well to make sure that I've hit Master, and not just hit Master, but I wanted to hit at least a respectable rank at some point. As you can see right now, I'm currently hovering inside the top 50. As of recording this, I'm at 38. But I've played enough games now where I feel confident in sharing lists with you, with the audience. And so for this video specifically, I'm going to go through the 5 lists that performed the best for me when I was climbing through Diamond and since I've been in Master rank. So these are the 5 lists that as I kind of track my progress, track my games, have just had the best win rates, the best performance. We're going to start with a burn deck. And I'm also going to, we'll go to the collection here. I'm also going to put the deck codes for all 5 of these lists in the video description. So, you know, if you want to copy them, modify them, etc., you can feel free to do so. So this is a burn list. This is probably the closest to a version of time to fight that a game like this can get. So if you follow me from the Elder Scrolls Legends, you know very hyper-aggressive lists were my thing, and naturally I was going to try to figure out a way to make that work, and this one actually worked out pretty well. The idea is to try to get as much free damage as possible, and then when your opponent stabilizes, because most of your units are pretty understated in this list. I say most of them because you have stuff like Legion Rearguard that are a bit overstated for their cost because they have a drawback. But for the most part, a lot of these are just meant to go fast. And eventually you're going to lose control of the board. It's like inevitable with this list. So there's a lot of ways to just kind of finish off your opponent. Now, a lot of 1-drops here, right? 9 1-drops. We want to be playing something on 1. If you are playing this deck and you don't have a 1-drop, you should mulligan until you find a 1-drop. We got 3 Legion Rear Guards, but then I'm also rocking 3 Saboteurs and 3 Teemos. Now you might see this and think this is going to be some cheeky puff cap deck. This is in here because it is a 1/1 elusive with upside. Make no mistake about it, that's the only reason Teemo is here. It attacks and it gives you free damage. But we run these 3 because this is statistically just the heaviest hitting of the 1-drops. This can also hit for 3, but even if it's blocked, you likely still get to deal that 1 damage to the enemy nexus. So again, kind of free damage. This is maybe this game's version of a Nord Firebrand. And then again, Teemo here, it's a 1-drop with elusive, also has some upside. And when I say upside, I mean, you know, occasionally your opponent might take 1 or 2 extra damage from puff caps, which traditionally is not a big deal, but in a deck like this where the margin is pretty razor thin, that 1 or 2 damage matters, and it can be the difference between lethal or not. So these are the 1-drops. At 2, I was rocking 2 Battlecasters. I tried this with 3, but again, even though you can go wide, your quote-unquote wide board state lasts for around maybe 2 tops, because they're going to take some fortuitous blocks and ruin your board state. You're just trying to get damage in as much as possible. So I toned this down to 2, and you kind of play this to, again, just give your wide board like one good attack. But after that, your board's probably going to get nuked. Boom Crew Rookie, because the card is nuts, but also, again, free damage on the enemy Nexus. Three Brothers Bond. This card is outstanding because if you have 2 unblocked units, this is pay 2, deal 4, which is one of the better returns on investment in the game. I say one of the better because I still personally think Mark of the Isles is the best return on investment. Mark of the Isles is absolutely bonkers, but this is right up there. Grenadier. Grenadier is actually kind of outstanding in this list. The 1 health is obviously a drawback, but it swings for 3. The last breath means you're likely dealing 2 to the Nexus. And the swinging for 3 is very relevant because Fearsome is very popular in the current meta. And when you are in an aggressive mirror, being able to play this to block a Fearsome unit, and then even in blocking, you still get damage out of it that is going to help you outrace them. This card has really kind of overperformed my expectations when I was trying it out. Mystic Shot, you can either clear a path for your units or just throw it right at the Nexus, which is very often what I do. Amateur Aeronaut. So much like Teemo, this is in here to get that free elusive damage. But the other reason that I'm a big fan of this particular card is that it is a 2/3 elusive at the same cost as Shadow Assassin. So while Shadow Assassin cycles and draws you a card, which is very relevant for like mid-range and certainly late game control lists, in a deck like this, the card draw kind of doesn't matter because we're trying to end the game very quickly. And so this being able to attack, and then if it gets blocked by a Shadow Assassin, which is again a very common unit run to stop elusive units, it survives, right? They have to put even more resources into killing it. This card has been very good, far better than I thought it was going to be. 2 Sentries. This is basically to stun a potential blocker, and then again, it's a 3 attack unit, so when you're in those aggressive mirrors, very good for stopping Fearsome. Get Excited. Again, more damage that goes to everything, basically just the big brother to Mystic Shot. 1 Katarina. I threw her in as a 1-of because I don't think you ever really want to draw multiples, but when you do get her as a 1-of, she certainly let me win more games than I probably had any business winning, because the minute that she levels up, it allows you to start continuing to pressure your opponent even on their turn. So if you're not developing your board, you can just play cat and swing for free every time on their turn. And it is very annoying. It chews through potential blockers because of her quick attack. It was very effective. I liked what she did for the deck, but I still don't think that I ever really want more than 1 in my hand. So she's at most, I think, ever a 2-of, but I think it's fine as a 1-of for now. And then Used Cask Salesman is also actually pretty solid in this list. Not only does it give you 2 bonus damage to their Nexus when the Caustic Casks die, but again, 3 attack means it can block Fearsome units. For non-Fearsome units, if you play this on a defensive turn, those Ephemeral Casks can just block for free. So this is like a poor man's Skitterer. It doesn't give you nearly the same value as a Skitterer, but for a deck like this, it does its job fairly well. 2 Jinxes. This is kind of your top end, and also being able to give yourself a rocket. Like even just 1 rocket is probably enough to win you the game with a deck like this, and you're going to blow through your hand very quickly. So she's here as kind of one of your finishers, and then the other finishers are Decimates. Decimate is very misleading for one, because normally the definition of Decimate is to reduce by 10%, and this hits a Nexus for 20% of its health. But this is another card that I think has overperformed my expectations. I've absolutely won games because I've played a Decimate, and then the minute that it went to the opponent's turn, I played a second Decimate, because that is 8 damage, and it's just a heavy hitter. So it's a great closer. I don't think you actually need a more significant top end than this, and this deck performed very well for me along the way. So if you're looking for a very aggressive list, that's one. I've got one other one over here that I'm going to talk about at some point as well. So next up, as far as lists that performed well for me, this is basically the Freeze Ezreal, the Frost Ezreal, the Elnuks or the Elnuk Ezreal that you've probably heard of. There's a couple of different variants floating around. This is just the version that I played. For example, I've seen lists that don't run Rummage at all. I've seen run a couple that run like 1 or 2. I've seen lists that run 3 progress days. So don't take like my list as the meta list, because I think there's room for tweaks in there, but this is what I was running. So Thermogenic Beam, it's a spell and it kills things. All right, so a lot of the cards in here are based around leveling Ezreal up. If you don't know what this deck does, you just stall until you can get a leveled up Ezreal, and then the minute Ezreal hits the board, you kind of just win the game from his triggers. When he's leveled up, says that when you cast a spell, you deal 2 damage to the enemy Nexus. So as we go through the spells, I'll talk about which ones you use to level him up, and then which ones you can use as finishers once he's on the board. So Beam is usually a level up Ezreal card. It's also one of your better defensive tools, because while we have great ways to kill low health minions in this list, Beam is basically the best way to take out high health stuff. So it can feel bad to spend 6 to do it, or sometimes more if you don't have ways to be very mana efficient, but this is one of the best ways to deal with an enemy Hecarim, for example. Brittle Steel, this is just about stalling. It's also at burst speed, which is very relevant. This card can be used to level up Ezreal, but also can be helpful when utilizing the finisher because it's burst speed. All of your spells in here that are burst speed, your opponent can't respond to them. So once you played your leveled up Ezreal, you can just kind of go off. And if you play like 4 burst spells in a row, there's nothing they can do about it. So this is a stall tool and potentially helping you finish things off. It's also one of the reasons that I personally like to run the 3 Rummage, because when you, again, resolve that leveled up Ezreal, even if you don't have good finishers, but you have Rummages, then you can, at burst speed, rummage through your deck to find finishers and also keep dealing 2 damage every time you rummage at burst speed. Ice Bale Archer, this is a stall tool that's very important. The play effect counts for leveling up Ezreal because it targets an enemy unit. The Frostbite is a great stall tactic, and the 3 attack power means it blocks Fearsome. Mystic Shot, again, can be used to kill Mist Wraiths and things of that nature, kill those pesky elusives, but can also be used as a finisher when you target a Nexus. When you have a leveled up Ezreal, this is basically spend 2, deal 4. Marksman, this is like the big brother to Ice Veil Archer, right? Deal 1 damage to an enemy unit, helps you level up Ezreal. 3 attack power, helps you block Fearsome. Ezreal. Interesting thing about Ezreal is, unless I have multiples in my hand, I almost never play them until they've leveled up. There are a couple of matchups where if I know they have very limited ways to deal with Ezreal, I'll consider playing him to start getting those Nexus strikes in and getting the free Mystic Shots, but for the most part, I almost never play early Ezreals. I just wait till he's already leveled up, and then I treat this like a combo deck. You just kind of play him and go off. Get Excited, again, big brother to Mystic Shot, damage to anything, can be a finisher, can be removal. We're running Bull Elnuk, and then I'm going to skip down and also talk about Troop of Elnuks. This 6-card Elnuk package is being splashed in a lot of different decks right now, but you use it in this list to help you in the mid game. Being able to get free bodies to just stall is great. Sometimes you get chip damage in as well, which means you need far less of your combo to be successful, and actually killing your opponent becomes a whole lot easier if you've attacked for, 3 or 4 a couple of times. So the Elnuk package is great for this deck. I'm chuckling because I actually really kind of dislike playing against the Elnuks at this point. I think that the drawback of running the Elnuks is low, but it's not like super low, but the ceiling potential is astronomical. I posted it on Twitter, but like I had somebody who played on turn 5, right? Like I had a great start. I'm playing an aggressive list. I'm playing against this deck. And on turn 5, they dropped Troop and they got 3 extra Elnuks. So, they basically got an entire board on turn 5 for free, and they're already playing a deck that has a far better late game than me. So I just personally dislike how high the ceiling is, because it can go from like 1 extra body. It goes from like being similar in value to Wraithcaller to Oops, I Won the Game, right? Like the League of Legends equivalent would be like, sometimes you play Karthus' ult and 1 in 100 times, instead of it just dealing damage to all of the enemies, it just kills them all, right? If that was a League of Legends thing, people would freak out, but that's kind of the ceiling with the Elnuks. Is it rare? Yes. Does it make you happy when it happens? Absolutely not. Anyway, rest of the list. Chumpwump. This card is great in this list for a number of reasons. The 4/4 for 4 is a good enough stat line to help you stall. The 4 health means it survives against those 3 attack units. The 4 attack means it can block Fearsome. And the 2 free mushroom clouds that it creates can be used for a number of things. The most common uses are you can pitch them to Rummage, so that post Chumpwump this becomes pay 1, draw 2. And another way that you can use them is to pitch them to Get Excited. But once you get your leveled up Ezreal, these are burst speed spells that you're sticking in your hand that cost 1. So the Puff Cap part doesn't even matter. They become, once this is leveled up, pay 1 to deal 2 to the enemy Nexus at burst speed. So, you know, if you've got 3 or 4 of them sitting in your hand, you drop this Ezreal, that's a lot of damage, just unavoidable. It's very, very powerful. Static Shock is in here because it cycles. It deals damage to enemies. So this card is interesting because it says deal 1 to 2 enemies, but that counts the enemy Nexus. I think that new players don't understand that you can target the Nexus with Static Shock. And sometimes it's actually better to do that, even if it's not like your finishing move, right? If you're not trying to finish off the Nexus, there are times where it can be more beneficial to at least throw 1 damage at the Nexus, because if you target 2 enemies and then through other effects, whether it's like Glimpse or other self-sacrifice things, for whatever reason those enemies leave, then your spell fizzles. But if you Static Shock the enemy Nexus in 1 unit and then they glimpse the unit, Static Shock still resolves, so you still draw the card and at least get credit for targeting 1 enemy. So overall, though, this is really just here to help you level up Ezreal and dig for Ezreal. The fact that it cycles and it targets 2 things is pretty important. Top end, Harsh Winds. This is really straightforward. It is a great stall tool. It targets 2 enemies, and as a result of it targeting 2 enemies, you get credit as 2 targets for Ezreal. Pretty straightforward. And then, like I said, I see a lot of lists run 3. I personally cut down to 2 progress days because I run 3 Rummage. If I didn't run 3 Rummage, I'd probably go back to 3 progress days, because this card is very important for the end of the game. I'm trying to figure out the best way to word this. Like, this is what sets up your finisher. Usually, right around the time that Ezreal is either leveled up or about to be leveled up, you're hitting a point in the game where you've likely banked 3 spell mana, you're going into round 7 or 8, so you hit this point where you are going to play Progress Day, get a bunch of cheaper cards in your hand, and then that's setting your combo up so that on the following turn you play Ezreal, and then you play all your, you know, newly acquired cheap cards to get the victory. So it's really part of the combo. But the reason that I cut to 2 beyond just the Rummage issue was I had a couple of games where I was getting multiples of this in my hand, but I was only ever resolving 1. So at this point, I think 2 is probably fine. But overall, this is the gist of the list. And so let's move on. All right, so this is one of my like homebrew lists. I've been tinkering with this off and on for quite some bit, but this is the most recent version, and it is far more effective than it has any reason to be. I still honestly don't even know why I win with this list, but it is statistically still one of my better performing lists, even through Diamond and Master. So this is a control list, and it is a control list that's designed to deal with aggressive lists, utilizing a fair amount of lifesteal. And then for the control matchup, you are trying to use Judgement as your sweeper to counter cards like Harrowing, which has popped up in popularity recently. So we're using Fleet Feather Tracker to help deal with early game threats. It also turns on things like Black Spear, even though we're only running this as a 1-of. but it also late game will turn on things like Radiant Guardian, and I am, even at 8 costs, still running a couple of Rasas here. So it's an activator, and it's basically removal. I'm running 2 Warden's Prey because they, again, are pretty easy things to sacrifice, but the Last Breath units that it has provided me have just been good enough. This could very easily be Aristocrat. This could be a number of things, but I just wanted some more early game presence to kind of serve as speed bumps. 1 Black Spear, just removal. It's conditional though, and we've got a lot of other things going on in this list that I don't think you need to run a number of them. Glimpse, it's still one of the best card draw spells in the game. Like, I don't know how else to put it. Like, if you're running Shadow Isles, you're running Glimpse. 2 Purifies. This is primarily to help you stop elusives, but because of the balance changes, I've been seeing the Noxus Spiders list pop back up in popularity. This is a great way to deal with crowd favorite, because if they play that and it's, you know, a 5/5, a 6/6, or a 7/7, if you purify it, it goes back to the 2/2. Elusive units, again, it gets rid of the elusive keyword, so then you can block them. And in control matchups, if you run into an opposing Ledros, then you can purify their Ledros and then kill it, and it will not go back to their hand. So there's a lot of neat uses for this. Even in some matchups, I've used it on my own units, because if you purify your own unit that has been frostbitten, they actually gain their attack power back, because frostbite is like a temporary keyword and it purges it. So this is a neat spell. 1 single combat. Much like Black Spear, I view this as just conditional removal, but I like having at least one of these in here, because once you have Radiant Guardian on the board, it can be a source of kind of like additional life steal. 3 Vile Feast helps with your early game. 3 Fioras and 3 Proteges. These are, again, just removal on bodies in the form of Challenger. Fiora here also does combo with your Judgments against aggressive lists. So there are times where you can just accidentally win with Fiora. Fiora is not your win condition, so do not feel like you need to overinvest in protecting her. Treat her as a 3/3 challenger unit who just sometimes wins you the game. But overall, challenger units. 1 Garen. I go back and forth on even if I want Garen in the list. There are times where Garen's actually been really good, and then there are times when he feels pretty lackluster. I truly feel like it's probably better if it's a second Thresh. But the problem is, at that point, if Thresh ever does level up, it's only fetching Fioras, because we're not running any real top end here. So Garen could be a Thresh. Garen also could be a Hecarim if you want to pressure your opponent. I'm still currently running Garen, and if I'm being entirely honest, in certain matchups, the 5/5 body with regen is nice. So still 1 Garen, but this is a card that comes in and out of the list probably more than any other. 3 Grasps, it's just additional removal, a little bit of drain. The healing's important. Radiant Guardian, this plus Judgment is basically your real win condition against aggro. If you resolve Radiant Guardian with the lifesteal and the tough, and then you successfully Judgment with it, traditionally aggro opponents just scoop, because there's not much they're doing at that point. I mean, it's kind of absurd. The only ones that don't scoop are ones that aren't true aggro. They're a bit more mid-rangey. The Shadow Isles lists that run Hecarim and Rekindler, for example, will kind of make you play it out, because if they run into multiple Rekindlers, they'll just kind of run that value train. But yeah, this card plus Judgment's outstanding. Thresh is in here for the same reason that Fiora is. It's really just a big-bodied challenger unit. But much like Fiora, people also, whenever you have champions like this, or like Fiora that have like insane top ends, I tend to find that people go way out of their way to get rid of them, because they assume you're running them for a reason. So they don't want you to use Thresh to pull stuff for free. They don't want you to win with Fiora, so they overinvest in killing them, and they're not your game plan, so it just kind of works out. Withering Whale, this is in here for the aggressive lists and the healing. Atrocity is a very common finisher for us. The trick is timing. Deny is far less popular in the current meta, but Deny is not the only thing you have to worry about with Atrocity. What you have to worry about is when you play Atrocity and you're trying to take out the enemy Nexus, if they have any effect they can play at fast speed that basically gets rid of the unit you're trying to Atrocity, they stop the effect. So that can be anything from like them judgmenting your unit to them, you know, Will of Ionia, or even just frostbiting your unit. So you have to be very, very careful with your timing. You have to go through the motions and make your opponent spend their mana and then pull it off. Now, there are going to be sometimes some games where your opponents just never give you that window, and the only thing you can do is make the play and pray. Hope that Cthulhu grants you the boon needed, the luck needed to pull it off. But for the most part, if you're really smart about your timing, this is a very quality finisher. I'm running one Soul Gorger, and this is a card that I am really enjoying in the current meta. The 7 health makes this thing a monster. The lifesteal is very relevant. Swapping it out for Garen is something that I have done off and on, depending on the decks I'm running into at the time. So if you're wondering like what I swap Garen out for, Soul Gorger is very often one of those cards. A third Withering Whale is sometimes that card. Garen comes in and out for a lot of things. Sometimes it's a vengeance. Kind of depends on what I'm running into. For whatever reason in this game, the matchmaking is very streaky. And so I find that if I'm running against, you know, 1 or 2 decks, I run into those same 2 decks for like 3 hours. And then something will shift, and then I run into like 2 different decks for 3 or 4 hours straight. But it seems to be very streaky, and so making changes to deal with those streaks is very important. Vengeance, Judgement, Rasa, and then Ledros on your top end. So basically, as I said before, you're trying to use Judgment to get big sweeping clears, and then use your big bodies to just kind of finish them off if they don't auto-concede when you make the sweeps. Against other control decks, use Judgment to counter cards like the Harrowing. Against War Mother's Call, I'm going to be honest, that's going to just be a slugfest. It's probably going to go until they've lost most of the cards in their deck. You've lost most of yours. Sometimes you can outvalue them just by trying to go for as many like 3 or 4 for 1s as possible. Sometimes the Ledros Atrocity game plan is the only game plan. It feels like you should be unfavored in those games, but again, for whatever reason, I keep winning with this list. So I figured I'd share it. It's working for whatever reason. Anyway, that's this list. Deck code will be in the video description. We're going to go down to the last 2. So this one is a list that was created by somebody by the name of Kapata. And if I'm saying that incorrectly, I apologize, but credit where credit is due. We follow each other on Twitter, and they posted it, and I liked what they were trying to do. So I tried it out, and it's very effective. I like this list a lot. This is like the Shadow Isles version of that burn deck that I shared earlier. So the one that I was playing with the Noxus effects and the Piltover effects that were trying to get as much direct damage as possible, this is same basic concept, but with Shadow Isles. Hapless Aristocrat, Mark of the Isles, and Teemo are your 1-drops. So Mark of the Isles is insane burst damage. Aristocrat here is to give you a body that is going to die, and then you can kill it again, and that'll make sense in a little bit because this deck is kind of built around Prankster. Teemo is used for the exact same reason as I used it in my burn deck. It's literally just a 1/1 elusive with upside, try to get the free damage in. Arachnid Horror, this is all about the Fearsome. Same with Elise. Boom Crew Rookie, again, same thing. Get that damage on the enemy Nexus. Elise is very good in this list as well because the spiders she creates are just more bodies to potentially die and trigger the Prankster. Glimpse, because card draw is insane. This one Relic is mostly here, again, for Prankster, but it's a bit clunky at times, so I wouldn't personally run more than the 1. Like, I understand exactly why they made that choice, but there are times when this can go off for a pretty insane amount of value. Mystic Shot, and I'm just going to skip ahead and get excited. If you haven't figured it out by now, removal, sometimes finishers. Frenzied Skitterer, this card is just bonkers good right now. What this card does, both offensively and defensively, is incredibly solid. I wouldn't be shocked if this ends up getting adjusted at some point because of how impactful this can be on an entire turn, especially in the early game. Like on turns 3 through 5, when your opponent is playing something pre-attack and you drop this, it's just demoralizing. This card is outstanding. Phantom Prankster. So this is kind of what the deck is built around. When another ally dies, deal 1 to the enemy nexus. And so you've got basically all of these, cheap, get damage in kind of cards, but much like my other deck, they're understated, so they're going to die. You're going to lose them to unfavorable trades at some point, but when they die, Prankster allows you to get value out of them. And going a step further, so let's look at the next card. Again, used Cask Salesman. We were using that in the other list as well. This card, paired with even just a single Prankster, turns into basically 4 damage on the enemy nexus, right? It's going to be a 3-2 body. They're going to take 4 and you're going to take 2. That's outstanding. So Prankster enables an awful lot of damage. You don't have to attack with it. It just hangs out in the back, so it's very hard to deal with because of the 3 health. It can't be hit with Mystic Shot. They've got to use more premium removal to get rid of it. They've got to use like a Challenger effect. This is a thorn in folks' side. Now, my other list, I was running Jinx and Decimate as the top end. This particular list, though, because Prankster is your win condition, you need things to feed to Prankster. So instead of relying on direct damage to kind of go over the top, this list runs 3 progress days to just refill your hand and then keep feeding the Prankster. And it works out entirely fine in this particular list. These have not felt clunky here like they have in other lists for me. But as I said, shout out to Kapata. I saw them posted on Twitter, thought I would give it a try. It was very effective. It's certainly something that fits my playstyle. I really enjoy it. And the last list is the modern version of Elusives. The list that I'm running is one that Sixo posted. Sixo from the Hearthstone community, also known in Artifact as well, was playing in some of those We Play events. So this is basically still Ionia Elusives, but you're splashing Freljord for Elixir of Iron and Omen Hawk. And the reason you're only splashing is because you're actually running Kinku Wayfinder. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Elixir of Iron, this is a cost-efficient burst speed spell to keep your Elusives alive. And with the loss of some of the hand buff effects, this is one of the better ways to make sure your elusive units and your Zed stay alive. Similarly, Omen Hawk is the new inspiring mentor. Since mentor no longer buffs the health of the stuff in your hand, instead you're just playing and then through Conspirator replaying the units and hoping that it buffs something in your deck. There's really no other way for me to put it. This is, you play this, you hope it hits some elusives, you hope that when you draw said Zed or elusives, it's super buffed. One interesting thing to note, however, is this Blade Scout and the Omen Hawk, both of their effects are summon effects, not play effects. That means they trigger whenever they enter the battlefield, not when you play them from hand. And that's important because Kinku Wayfinder here has the allegiance of, when it comes into play, you summon 2 1-cost allies from your deck. The idea being when you play this, you're also going to get some combination of these for free, and you're going to get their triggers. So this is why this is primarily an Ionia list. It's to make sure that this is pulling these units consistently. The rest is going to look really familiar if you've played Elusives. Duo, elusive unit. Conspirator, elusive unit that also lets you bounce and replay these. Even if you have to bounce Blade Scout, it's not the end of the world because then when you replay it, again, it's going to pick up elusive, so there's a lot of benefit there. Shadow Assassin, elusive. Twin Disciplines. This can be a finisher in terms of getting extra damage. It can help protect your units. It can be absolutely amazing on Lifeblade. Yes, this list does still run Lifeblade post-nerf. Zed just benefits from a bunch of your hand buff stuff. The 6.0 version runs 1 Deny and 3 Will of Ionia. When I'm running into streaks of heavy control opponents, like I had, I don't know, like a 3-hour stretch where almost all my games were against Karma harrowing decks. When that was occurring, I switched these out, so I was running 2 wills and 2 denies just to make sure that I had the deny for the harrowing when it came time to need it. Deny is also very good against the Karmalist for stopping Deathmark. So overall, I don't think you ever go to 3 deny, but you can make that substitution if needed, depending on what you're running into. Lifeblade is still here as a 2-2, just because we're trying to buff it with Omen Hawk and we're trying to buff it with the new stud, which is Jeweled Protector. So this got a bit of a buff, despite the fact that Inspiring Mentor got a nerf. This card is as advertised now. This is totally worth playing. This is a 4/4 that gives something +3/+3. If it's been hit by 1 Omen Hawk, and for whatever reason, it's just my luck, it seems to be hit with that frequently, then you're paying 5 for a 5/5 that's also going to give you +3/+3 on a unit. Against aggressive lists, if you put that +3/+3 on a Lifeblade, it makes this card backbreaking. Putting this on a Zed is huge, but even if you just put it on something like a Blade Scout and you make it so that this becomes like a 1 cost deal 5 to the enemy Nexus because it has elusive, it's huge. Like, the value that this card brings to the table is completely worth the investment now. The 4/4 stat line is also relevant because there are so many units that have 3 attack power in the game, so that 1 extra health is totally relevant. It allows you to survive, get those value trades in. The 4 attack means you can also block fearsome units. There's just a lot to like about this unit right now. It was a small buff, but it was a very impactful buff. And then your finisher, your top end, is the Windfarer Hatchling. It just comes down, it grants your entire squad a big bonus, and you swing for the win. This is very, very powerful. The only thing that I want to highlight about this card is be very aware of the traps that you can walk into with this. There are times where you might have this and think it's a slam dunk to play this and then go for the victory, but if your opponent is playing a late game control deck and they're on enough mana to play Ruination, for example, the last thing you want to do is play this and then have your entire squad get bombed by Ruination. So just pay attention to what your opponents might have, play around them properly, but this is a very effective finisher when it goes off. And that's the list. So those are the 5 lists that I've had the most success with through Diamond and in Master. That codes will be in the video description. I'm hoping to have some more videos coming this week where I'm playing some example games on each of the lists, just so that you can see how they perform. But I wanted to share with you, now that I've hit Master and, you know, played some games, got a feel for what the meta is like, I wanted to share with you the decks that were working for me. So if you made it this far through all of my ranting and ramblings, I appreciate you. Thank you for hanging out. Hopefully you'll come back and watch some future videos.